unfortunately. Everybody speaks English. That's also due to the recent history, fairly recent history of the American being for some time in the Philippines.
Hello viewers, welcome back to Desi Family Reaction. तो व्यूअर्स कैसे हैं, उम्मीद करते हैं कि आप खैरियत से होंगे और हमारी वीडियो को मजे से देख रहे होंगे। मैं हूं तौसीफ अलवी
और मैं हूं अदनान अलवी।
तो हाजिर है एक नई वीडियो रिएक्शन के लिए, वो भी आपकी खिदमत में।
हाँ, खिदमत में है, सही बात है। और वीडियो का टाइटल है वो भी हम आपको बता दें, जकार्ता वर्सेस मनीला, which is the better for travel in 2022 इंडोनेशिया फिलीपाइंस। ये दोनों सिटी हैं, एक जो है इंडोनेशिया का कैपिटल है, एक है फिलीपाइंस का। और ये कंपैरिजन आई थिंक कर रहे हैं इस वीडियो में। तो वीडियो को स्टार्ट करने से पहले आप बताएंगे फिर कौन सा जो मतलब बेस्ट होगा इनमें, और वो हम आपको बाद में बताएंगे। उससे पहले हमारी वीडियो को लाइक कर दें, चैनल पे नहीं है तो चैनल को
सब्सक्राइब कर दें।
तो करते हैं वीडियो स्टार्ट बिना टाइम वेस्ट किए। लेट्स
स्टार्ट द वीडियो।
Alright guys, let's talk about Jakarta and Manila, two capital cities of two huge island nations. First of all, to get it out of the way, I feel like both cities are underappreciated. They're definitely underloved. You hear people going to, yeah, Bangkok, oh yeah. And then you hear people, don't go to Manila, just go straight to the beautiful islands of the Philippines. Jakarta. Many people only know even Bali. When it comes to the perspective of traveling, maybe even living, staying for a few months, or maybe even longer in a city, I want to share a little bit my impression.
You know, if I think of Philippines, I'm thinking amazing blue beaches. I'm thinking Indonesia with its volcanoes, the tropical islands, but yet both of the capital cities, Manila and Jakarta, you don't hear too much about it from, let's say, a traveler's perspective. Not too many people talk about how much they want to go there, and in contrast to, let's say, cities like Bangkok that are fairly high on people's list, I feel like in some ways they might be underrated. Not too many people visit them, and today I want to put them next to each other and share with you the pros and cons, the differences of the two cities, and whether or not I think you should visit one of them.
And before we get into it, if you're new here, my name is Dan, and for the past 5 years I have been on the road, sometimes changing countries every 1 week or two, but in the past few years staying even more so for 3 months, 4 months, at least a month in every country to get a bit of a feeling for it before moving on and talking about this lifestyle of remote living. So if that is something you're into, next to just travel content, I document my life, going to cool places. So first of all, Jakarta. It's a humongous city. Population is a bit over 10 million people. Manila itself, you have to understand, there is Metro Manila, which is kind of like the area of Manila, like the area of Jakarta. There is places like areas like Makati, areas like BGC, which are really modern, really nice. Same as with Jakarta. The cities are very similar from the aspect that they're very large. They're not really walkable. They're definitely, it's also hard to get from one area to another. Traffic is probably horrible in both places. For me, it would be hard to compare where it is worse because I've been in Jakarta during COVID times and it was very quiet, but now it's still busy. Manila was an absolute nightmare. It was almost impossible to like drive 10 kilometers without it taking hours. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you're gonna stay in one area, like I'm gonna give some my personal recommendations, then you don't really need to drive around and it doesn't become that big of an issue. Maybe like once every few weeks or however when you go to the airport, it might be. But you know, the thing when you hear about both cities, the first thing you mostly hear from travelers, maybe even locals, they're just like, forget about Manila, just head straight away to Palawan, like beautiful islands, beautiful beaches. Maybe I'm going to show you some things like right now. And you know, I don't want to sugarcoat none of the two cities. It's true. It's true. There's definitely some poverty in both cities, or maybe even a good amount of that still. Jakarta is actually being known for the city that is sinking, or let's say it's the clickbait that is often people like to use to just, you know, always get a little bit more clickbait, just like we do in this video. And the truth is that the water levels are rising closer to the shores. Let's talk about the positive side. Let's talk about the interesting side of things to do, a little bit the history, a little bit the culture, and that's where the two cities really differ. So they're similar from the outlet that there are some areas they're a little bit older, some areas a little bit nicer, others more poor. And then you have these like super business districts, both in Manila as well as in Jakarta. They have a little bit maybe of a New York vibe, a little bit also the Bangkok vibe, huge sky rises. I'm going to show you some drone shots right now from Jakarta. You can check out the other videos I filmed around it, and from Manila goes the same. So my recommendation for Manila, let's first talk about like the business district, the nice areas to stay, where it's super modern, and if you like big city vibes, if you like to go to a rooftop bar, everyone's crazy about the Bangkok rooftop bars. Well, let me tell you one thing, Manila has amazing rooftop bars, and so does Jakarta. And the areas in Jakarta, the two areas, one is called Kuningan or Mega Kuningan. It's an area with embassies, with a lot of office buildings and residential buildings alike, so really comfortable to stay. You can stay in a building with a super nice gym. You can go out, you can go for walks. There's areas that are developed, not just one or two streets where it's, let's say, like nice, but it's actual neighborhood where you can go for an hour walk and it just feels super futuristic and super modern. And when I arrived in Jakarta, like with any big city, I knew there's going to be a nice area, but in Jakarta I've actually been a little bit blown away. Similar as the Philippines, but here maybe even a little bit more. They have like this brand new SCBD area that I'm staying in right now.
SCBD.
And so with that, like, you're definitely gonna have some nice places to stay, be it for a few days or for a few weeks. Check out some rooftop bars, just get a little bit the city vibes, the exhilarating. I just did actually a poll on my story. It's kind of like, I like to be a little bit stuck in between, well, not stuck, I like to bounce around in between this big city vibe, which is exhilarating, which wakes you up. You see people are on the go, a little bit this like New York mentality, but it also can burn you out easily. And I feel like, or at least, you know, I like to listen to podcasts, I like to consume information around the fact of, you know, in terms of like mental well-being, we're just not made to sit in huge skyscrapers all year long and just stare at walls. And there the thing is with both Jakarta and Manila, that's what they have in common. Even though they have huge skyscrapers and sky rises, the cities are still fairly green in terms of the business districts, BGC in Manila, and here SCBD in Jakarta. Both of them still have like a lot of trees, a lot of things are developed nicely in comparison maybe to a Dubai that right now tries to also have more greenery, which is obviously harder, you know, it's a desert. But yeah, those are probably the two areas. In Manila, it's going to be the BGC area. There I just did a little trip there, day trip there. Really nice, big buildings, big mall complexes. Again, speaking about malls, both Jakarta and Manila are known for having humongous malls. Like, you can get lost there. Some of them are a little bit older, some of them are really new and have everything you might want, every single brand you might think of. Some exceptions, not really. Definitely all the big chains you're going to find both in Jakarta and Manila. So from the perspective of being a modern city, they have a lot of things in common. They have really nice areas while they struggle with some infrastructure issues, which I would say both cities are working on. Talking about public transportation and things like that, Jakarta is probably still a little bit better. They have an MRT line, where I think Philippines has also one. I tried it once, was not as good as here. This one's actually comparable to maybe, but they still both have just one line actually. In terms of buses and things like that, Jakarta is actually fairly well. Jakarta, like buses are running absolutely everywhere. In the Philippines, they still have the old jeepneys for the most part. They also have some buses, but like a jeepney, I don't know if I have a shot of it. It's basically like old American military cars. Some of that I think we're also going to make a transition a little bit into the history of both countries, which make the experience very different. Guys, honestly, taxis here as well as in Manila, I think in Jakarta a little bit cheaper than I can remember. Like, you can go from one side to the other side of the city for $5 for like a 40-minute drive. You just need to go around the neighborhood. 20 minutes is going to be like $2 for a taxi ride, maybe $3 in Manila, but pretty much around like very easy to get around. You have all the apps, Grab, and in Jakarta it's Gojek. So to talk about the culture, what makes the experience really different. So both countries have colonial history. In Indonesia, it's the Dutch that have been here for a few hundred years and really influenced the culture, and you still see it on the ground. So you can go into the old town of Jakarta and you can see the city hall. I think it's like around a 300-year-old building from the Dutch that they set it up, and it looks really interesting. It adds a vibe to this modern city in some neighborhoods, and then in other neighborhoods, like let's say Chinatown, is still I uploaded a video recently. It's still very like, it's a little bit like time traveling, like 30-40 years back with all the markets. And in the Philippines, you have the colonial history of the Spanish being there that really influenced the culture. And there you have the Intramuros, Old Town in Manila, which I actually really liked. It was like, for example, here the Old Town is not that large. In the Philippines, the Old Town is fairly big. You have these like wall structures, there's like some war memorials, and overall, just to walk around through that area, you see really old Christian cathedrals in the Philippines, a lot of them, especially in Manila, and some of them are actually look really nice, really cool. Here in Jakarta, you also have some churches, much less definitely than in the Philippines, naturally, because Indonesia is, I think it is actually the largest Muslim country in the world, yet with some exceptions, like the island of Bali is actually, that makes also the culture in Bali very different. But to get back to that, in terms of that, if you're coming from the outside, if you have never been to Indonesia, it definitely feels different than, let's say, a Middle Eastern country here. You have the mosques, prayers every few hours. In the Philippines, something worth mentioning. Everybody speaks English. That's also due to the fairly recent history of the American being for some time in the Philippines, and they also really affected the culture. The Philippines are extremely Western oriented when it comes to culture. You can get around with English super easily in the Philippines. Most people like speak it literally fluently, and even their own language, they kind of like mix it all the time. And in Jakarta, a lot of people are going to speak English as well. I don't know, maybe around half, I would say, in the business district a little bit more, outside of the business district a little bit less. So here, if you're going to leave Jakarta, honestly, I'm going to tell you there is some communication issues every once in a while. Maybe not necessarily issues, because you always have your hands, you have your eyes, and you have Google Translator on your phone. In Indonesia, I've been using it quite a lot. Talking about the cost of traveling, also very similar, both with accommodation, taxis as mentioned, food, things like that, restaurants.
Alright guys, and so on that note, I hope you got a bit of a feeling for both cities, Manila and Jakarta. I feel like they're both underrated in the sense that not that many people go there. And while I do think both of the cities have problems, while personally I probably wouldn't particularly choose them to stay like for weeks or months on end, I think both of them have a certain charm. Both of them definitely have areas that I would maybe avoid. And I'll be curious to hear, have you been to any of the two cities? How did you like them or maybe not like them? And while personally probably I prefer a city like Bangkok, maybe to live there also a little bit longer, I think both of them are really worth visiting, at least for a few days, to get a bit of a feeling. If you like the big city vibe, I think with every country you visit, if you visit Indonesia, it's kind of cool to see, the capital of the city. If you visit Philippines, I think it can also be really interesting. The Old Town. I'm coming to you right now from Bali. Depending on where I am, you can check me out on Instagram, so that I keep you a little bit up to date what I'm up to. And if you're into the topic of remote living, about living around the world, about finding places that offer more freedom, then you should join. See you soon.
We also enjoy this.
Yes.
See you again. Wonderful view capture.
For the past few years, I've been documenting my life here around perpetual travel and living around the world. And as of now, you're watching country number 51, Indonesia. We're going to be traveling all throughout Java Island, the known places, Bali, and maybe also some hidden gems.
Yeah, Indonesia का night view था. Wow यार, lovely. Good video. बहुत अच्छी इसने वीडियो बनाई है, अच्छे व्यू इसने कैप्चर किए हैं। दोनों कंट्री के ड्रोन व्यू भी थे और डे और वॉकिंग अराउंड वगैरह सब कुछ इसमें था। नाइट व्यू भी थे जकार्ता के भी, मिलाना के भी, फिलिपाइन का जो था,
और बहुत से अच्छे सीन बताए उन्होंने। कमाल के सीन थे, कमाल का था। दोनों सिटी एक दूसरे से बढ़ के थे। तो उन्होंने सबसे पहले जकार्ता बताया। जकार्ता बहुत अच्छा सिटी था, बहुत कमाल का सिटी है। तो फिलिपाइन का जो सिटी है वो भी बहुत कमाल का था। वीडियो बहुत अच्छी थी, लाइक की। तो चलते अदनान के पास सॉन्ग का वीडियो कैसी लगी?
और बहुत अच्छी थी यार, वीडियो कंपैरिजन था दोनों कंट्री के। हमें मुझे तो जकार्ता अच्छा लगा क्योंकि जकार्ता रेडी फेवरेट है। उसने बताया कि जकार्ता में हमारा टीम वगैरह सब कुछ के लिए सब कुछ है और सुपर मॉल वगैरह जकार्ता के देखे हैं हमने। और पीस गया, मतलब जो आइलैंड है ना समुद्र के साहिल के, वो फिलिपाइन में ज्यादा। और सबसे बढ़ के जो फिलिपाइन है उस वेस्टर्न जो है ना कल्चर है, सब फॉरेन की तरह ही है वो भी। और जो जकार्ता है इसका कल्चर जो है वो थोड़ा सा डिफरेंट था। तो ओवरऑल वीडियो बहुत अच्छी लगी, फैंटास्टिक थी। हमें तो बहुत एंजॉय की वीडियो। आप वीडियो कैसे लगी कमेंट में आपने बताएं। रिएक्शन कैसा लगा वो भी कमेंट्स में बताएं।
हाँ जी।
आप हमें ये भी बता सकते हैं नेक्स्ट वीडियो रिएक्शन वाली आपके लिए
कौन सी लाएं?
जाने से पहले
हमारी वीडियो को
लाइक कर दें, चैनल को
सब्सक्राइब कर दें।
वेट करें हमारे नेक्स्ट वीडियो तक। उम्मीद है कि आप
जल्द वापस आ जाए।
तब तक के लिए
अल्लाह हाफिज।